Truthiverse is officially sponsored by the Grow Network, founded by Marjorie Wildcraft, who is the female leader in the survival and preparedness space. With the food supply under attack worldwide and more uncertainty than ever, you may want to check out her free You Can Grow Food webinar. It'll show you how to grow loads of food as fast as possible, even if you have no experience, are older, or just plain out of shape. Check it out for free at brendansbackyard.com. All right, folks, welcome to the show. I am joined this week by the epic Demi Pietchell, who is a fellow Substacker and a very interesting, insightful human being in general. Demi, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking time to have a chat with me first off.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure. And so what I wanted to do with Demi was, firstly, she wrote a very interesting little piece on her Substack just recently about Elon Musk and what he's been up to. And I thought it'd be fun to dig into that and flesh it out some more, because she's obviously obviously knows more about Elon and what he's been up to than I do. I haven't followed him as closely as I might have liked to. But there's something interesting. There's always something interesting brewing there, because he is a bit of an enigma, one of the world's most famous people, but we don't necessarily know as much as we might like to about him. And because of the ambiguity of the not knowing, especially in the truth community, you see most people have a very strong opinion, whether it's one way or the other. And right. I don't, as such, I embrace the unknowing and the uncertainty, Demi. So I feel like you can flesh things out for us a bit. Do you want to first maybe let people know, how you ended up in this world, or what your background is that might be relevant to this space?
Sure. My background is in film and television and interactive telecommunications. I studied both at NYU, at Tisch. And I ended up studying media, propaganda, the ways in which these things fit together. And I ended up being a producer and content creator for over 20 years. I ran a podcast called Comcastro, and we explored, a lot of these topics there as well. It was like geek culture centric kind of a podcast. And, just being within the space of content creation and digital marketing is where I came up and through, and having worked in Hollywood. Cool.
Okay. So I imagine when you say you worked in Hollywood, you must have made some interesting connections along the way.
Yes. And a lot of them crossed over with the tech crowd in both LA and in San Francisco. They're very connected to each other.
Okay, cool. What was your how did you find the experience of being in Hollywood as such? Because there's a lot, obviously, of very dark stuff that's been coming out the last few, years and decades. Right. Did you feel like you were, present to that, or I don't know, what was your experience?
People who spoke about it would speak in whispers, even if they were around no one at all. So the impression that I got was it was something that was accepted because people were scared. People don't want to speak up because they're terrified. Mm-hmm. And that was one of my cues to leave, basically. I didn't want to be surrounded by that. I didn't want to be anywhere near it. And I went in another direction with content creation as opposed to film, which is what I had always wanted to do. That's what I had studied. But then I also went into studying the media, studying propaganda, studying experimental documentary. And I had, an entire different direction that I could go in with content creation. So I ended up spending my time picking these things apart once I saw what was happening there. So it was a better fit for me past that point, obviously, because, who wants to be around that? But, if even the people who should be able to do something about it are just as terrified as everyone else, you're not really going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually noticed also, this is a little bit of a tangent, not really following directly from what you just said, but I was looking at the bottom of your Substack article, and it says, Demi Pietchell explores survival, metaphysics, media, and the truth. And I thought, damn, we have more in common than I realized. And because survival is huge for me, and metaphysics is huge. So you've been in that realm for a while too, I gather.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the two go hand in hand. I always say to people, we prep to be responsible, but then once having done, we shift our focus to the timeline that we want to be on, so that, the worst that happens is we spent too much on food. We reconfigure the way that we see the world so that we can go in that direction of what we want to co-create with source, as opposed to hyper focusing on the need to survive when we would rather focus on thriving. Yeah. So that's my way of kind of making the two things coexist, because you do have to think it through and know what other people are planning to, know which direction you should go, but you should also use that information to inform jumping to a different timeline, or creating something different, co-creating with the universe to make something that you actually want to experience, and not these dark aspects of these things.
Yeah, it sounds like yeah, you're kind of in the aware, awake, but not kind of the black pilled sort of camp. There's a lot of black pilledness going around these days. So yes. Have you ever described yourself as a prepper? It sounds like you're of that kind of.
I don't know that I would describe myself as that predominantly, but I think that everyone who's ever lived in Florida is sort of a low-key prepper to begin with. We have so many hurricanes that come in and out of here. You have to be on top of your game in case of an emergency, and we've had them. So anyone who lives here, I think, would qualify as a prepper, even if they don't consider themselves that.
The state of Florida, yeah.
Yes, the entire state.
Yeah. And what piqued or how did you get into metaphysics in the beginning?
I actually, this is funny. My mother used to buy all these metaphysics books, and I grew up atheist. I was in a family of 5 different religions. I didn't subscribe to any of them. And that was sort of my way of rebelling. But I would read the books that she would bring into the house, and I would debunk her. And she thought it was the cutest, most precocious thing ever, and kept buying the books. So by the time I was ready to do a 180, because I had watched a few quantum physics videos and said, oh, I had that wrong, and just flipped, it didn't really have much of an impact on me one way or the other, because I always kept an open mind, but all the information was already in my head from that period of time. So it was just a matter of recontextualizing the information I had, and not thinking of it in terms of debunking it, but in terms of, okay, how does this work, and where are the correlations among different cultures that have this information, and let's go in that direction.
Yeah. And so you didn't have the whole like, oh my God, my whole identity is falling apart, and what do I do? Who am I?
No, but I did have other people reacting that way toward my shift, which was interesting. I didn't react that way, but other people felt like they couldn't set a watch by me anymore. So that was pretty interesting, to know that they would react in a big way to that. They had a huge reaction to that I didn't have to my own change.
Yeah.
So yeah. It paved the way. It came before all of this groupthink, cognitive dissonance being really out in front. So, for me to see that early on, when it wasn't there yet, so present yet, it was interesting to see that as a precursor to everything else that went on.
So when was that for you? What time frame were we talking about?
That was probably 2015 to 2017, as I was, sort of making my way into what I would think later on, and it didn't come until later on that I knew that I could channel. It like all of this started to come out little by little over time as I explored these elements more and more, and understood more and more about them. Then different things would open up inside of me, and I would be able to do those things. But what I like to tell everyone, and one of my missions through having the Substack and having my other presences on platforms, is that everyone can do it. It's not just something that some people can do because they're born with that gift. Some people access it more easily, especially if you had a lot of out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences as a child. You're able to access that part of consciousness, source consciousness, more readily than most people would. but you can always develop that. It's not necessary to have had those experiences, and everyone in being who they are, just in being a part of the human experience, they're able to access source consciousness. They're able to access that information and pull that in for themselves. It's open to everyone. That's part of your birthright.
Yeah, exactly. Since we are all born of the same stuff, source, consciousness, whatever you want to, however you like to phrase it. That's been something that's been of interest to me for a long time. I actually spent a couple of years back in my the first 2 years of my 20s going to a trance meditation group. So I've seen some pretty weird stuff over the years.
That's
Never
great.
dull.
What did you see there?
Oh, I mean, different types of personalities showing up. Occasionally, someone who, said they were a famous individual of some sort, but mostly not. Mostly just very obscure. And you see the personality types carry over into, like assuming that we were watching what we, people thought we were watching, as in actual channeling of deceased or discarnates. And some of them are disgruntled and don't necessarily particularly want to be there. Some of them are very confused, don't really know what's happened to them.
Yes.
It was a whole spectrum of things. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And having that cast of characters around must have been wild.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just for a Thursday night. You gotta do something with your Thursdays. Yeah. So okay, well, I think one day we're gonna have to circle back to the metaphysics stuff and really sort of spend a lot of time on it. Because before I really knew you, I saw comments, and it might have been in the terrain group that we're in, that Telegram group, and I saw a couple of comments you made that really got my attention. I was like, oh, she's switched on. She's referencing certain things that these are comments I don't see every day. And there were things, very up my alley at the time. So I think there's more there that we can, more threads we could pull on at a future date. But let's switch into the topic of choice today, which is the whole Elon Musk thing. And
absolutely.
And your piece on it. So what is it that you were mentioning there's something going on with Twitter and Substack, Twitter blocking Substack links. It's sort of like some other form of censorship. What's happening there? And let's get into what he's up to.
Right. So just getting into the comments that he's made to begin with. And I want to preface this by saying, I'm not talking about his intent when I get into this. I don't know what his intent is. It could be good, it could be bad, it could be neutral. I think that, overall his intent is to build a business, to build some sort of monopoly surrounding all of these different properties that he has, that he's accrued over time. And part of that is in concert with the government. Part of that is knowing what pieces he needs to accrue in order to make his end goals happen and move forward. Now, it's not to say that those goals are positive or negative. It's just to say that these are the goals, and if we follow that trajectory forward, we can see that there's a certain, if you want to call it a slippery slope, is going to happen there. And we will need to be vigilant about who is in control of these pieces as they fit together, because they absolutely interlock. So that's just like the overarching kind of view of this. When he acquired Twitter, he was talking about how WhatsApp was being used in China and social credit in China, and expressed an interest in using Twitter in that regard. So Twitter is a piece of this larger puzzle of what he's developing. It's not just, 44 billion that he spent on a lark to protect the public square. That's not the reason behind it. Yes, that's a great thing to say. It would, attract people on an ideological level, and people would get behind the cause there. And also there was a lot to uncover surrounding that. So, for people to want him to do that because they want to see under the hood, they want to peek under the hood of what was happening at Twitter, and how much of Twitter was operating in concert with other big corporations, with different hedge funds, with big government. and all of that coming together into a censorship machine that it was very difficult to permeate, regardless of how many people you had as followers. You know, I got booted off in, I want to say 2021 for even discussing Nowak, Dr. Nowak, when he passed away. He had been talking about, and he was like the expert on activated carbon, and he was talking about graphene in the shots. And he did a whole presentation on that. And the next day he had died, the next day after they put it out, right? So I was covering that. I put it forward on my Substack, and that caused me to be canceled from Twitter. So I had written about that, and you know, so this is, a lot of people have experienced the same thing, and they wanted somebody to take it over who was going to correct a lot of that, and he has, to his credit. You know, he's put a lot of people back on. He's given them back their platforms, but you know, in seeing Substack as a quote unquote competitor, he's now keeping those links from propagating. So if you post anything that has a Substack link attached to it, you're going to get dinged in the algorithm, because he's perceiving Substack as a competitor. Now, I don't think that's as far as it goes. I think it goes farther than that, because he happened to mention in passing in Business Insider that he would like to acquire Substack. He mentioned this a while back. The problem is the news cycle has a way of memory holing everything that someone in the public eye does, like past the next thing that they do in the public eye, because everything is so big and grandiose and takes up so much mind space that it's not something that people turn around and look at and say, oh, well, you can see this in context and connect the dots here and understand that there's a larger picture that's forming. Right. So he's trying to hurt Substack so that it would be, at least what I think, it would be easier to acquire. Because he wants that as a property to add to this, and to eventually acquire, you know, the majority of the properties, I would think, within that space, because that's what he and his crew are known for doing. They form monopolies, right? So the video that I posted within that, you know, he had been involved in PayPal, and PayPal merged with his company X.com, which is now what Twitter's going to be called, X.com. PayPal merged with X.com in the year 2000, and he worked on that with Peter Thiel. Now, Peter Thiel has this series of lectures that he gave. You know, the one I posted, I think, was the one that he gave at Stanford, but it was a series of different lectures covering the same topic, which was competition is for losers.
Right.
And it was basically that if you can't form a monopoly out of the company that you're putting forward, out of the idea that you're putting forward, if you can't buy the rest of whatever it is up and form a monopoly out of that, you have no business being in that sector. And it's not going to fly. And if you're looking at it, you know, to as that competition is good, you know, because that means like an expanded marketplace, then you're not seeing the big picture of it. The point is to take all of the rest of them down and bring them in, like, all under the same roof, because that's how you make money doing it, right? So that's how they think. So that was why I put that video forward, was to illustrate that. So he's already got that in his mind, that he needs to form a monopoly somehow, some way. And doing this to Substack is strategic, you know, so he's thinking, you know, steps and steps ahead, where most people are forgetting the news cycle that just came from before. So they're not seeing the big picture of that. They're not following the thread. No,
I'd say that's true of the vast majority of people.
Absolutely. So, you know, when we look at it that way, and we see that they're not really following that, and they're just, you know, they're just seeing things compartmentalized into whatever information they're getting at that particular moment. They're seeing, you know, choppy bits and pieces. They're definitely not putting together the entire trajectory of his career, right? Let alone what just happened last Friday. So when you look at it like that and you see that he's putting Twitter under X.com, which was formed with PayPal, back in 2000, merged with PayPal, you can see that there's this trajectory that's happening here where he is, forming an overarching connective infrastructure among all of the things that he's doing. And that's actually like probably one of the best ways to look at it. It's an infrastructure for something else.
Sure.
Okay. So when you look at SpaceX, of course, he's put up, all of these different satellites, tons of different satellites, and did that in concert with DARPA. In fact, he's one of the biggest government contractors, if not the biggest government contractor that there is. So, so his doing that, and his doing that in concert with the government, we don't know what they're doing behind closed doors because, obviously DARPA is the biggest top secret researcher as part of the government that the United States has. And he's, working in concert with them. I mean, and did on Falcon 1 and on from there. So Falcon 1 was in 2007. So I think that was his first foray into that space. But if we're going to go back, earlier than that, he had the Zip2 directory, which was acquired. And that was to create an infrastructure around finding anything that you could possibly find. This was early internet. So this was, creating like a massive directory for the world. So he's already like thinking in terms of like these massive infrastructures, right? And you can see that from that. And then getting into the connection among how he's going to be using Twitter, based on what he said about, WhatsApp being used as like a social credit hub, and, having like the entire public square tied into Twitter, we can extrapolate from that there's going to be some sort of social credit implementation happening through Twitter, but that he's controlling. It's not controlled by anyone on the outside. It's a private company. So unless he's made deals, that we don't know about, which he may have with the government because he has other deals with the government, right? So unless he has those deals and he's upfront about them because it is a private company, we don't know where that information is going, who has that information, who is utilizing that information in what way. Is it, being utilized in a positive way, in a negative way? We can obviously see the negative way that it could be used. And, how do we protect ourselves from that if we get into a situation where, maybe he does have good intentions, but maybe the people who end up utilizing the infrastructure that he builds do not have good intentions. And then where does that leave us? We have to figure that out. We have to be vigilant. We have to dig into this and figure out, what all of these bits and pieces mean together as a unit so that we can protect ourselves, even if he does have our best interests at heart.
Yeah. Because so often, as soon as anything becomes, as big as Facebook or as big as Twitter, now it's on the radar of entities like DARPA and the CIA and the NSA. It's just, you have to assume that at that point, when it is that big, you have to assume there's interference going on, there's backdoors being created. At the very best, all we can say is, well, they're harvesting our data and keeping it and whatever. That's the best scenario. And then the worst is like, we see all the just massive waves of censorship, the institution of this, well, like you're saying, the movement in the direction of social credits and this kind of thing. So yeah, we have no reason to be overly trusting, at least.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be, and honestly, the way that he talks, I don't think that he would expect us to. I think he would expect us to question what's going on here. That's what he would do. So it's not outside of the realm for for us to question that, or for I don't think it's anything that he would feel impacted by. If we were, it's just a matter of, how upfront are we going to be about the answers to these questions, and how do we put forward an infrastructure on top of this that keeps us safe from what's going to happen with this, or how do we know enough about it that it raises our awareness to decide whether or not we're going to engage with it, so that we can maintain our sovereignty, and those questions go in two different directions, and different people are going to look at that in different ways, right? So, so even when you've got, next down on the list here, Neuralink. So you've got a company like Neuralink that, those satellites can easily interface with the phone. They can easily interface with Twitter. How are those things unable to interface with Neuralink? They can, right? So just as easily as they can interface with your Tesla, with the automatic driving system within your Tesla.
That's reassuring.
Right? Yeah. So, if you've got a bad social credit score, in this dystopia that we're painting that may or may not be, what is the intention, but it's a way that somebody who has bad intentions could hack into it and use it, even if he doesn't mean for it to be that way.
Yeah.
Someone would be able to capture the car, keep you locked into the car, and drive the car right off a cliff because your credit score is low, your social credit score is low. And it's all integrated. So what do we do about that past that point? And how do we maintain that kind of vigilance over how our tech is being used and how it's being utilized against us? And to raise that kind of awareness about, not just privacy, and not just to have these conversations where people say, well, I have nothing to hide. Well, does it matter if you have something to hide or not, if you're getting locked in your car and it's going off of a cliff? I don't think so. So past a certain point, you have to give up the narrative that everyone is putting forward as far as, whether or not you have privacy, whether or not, you agree with that or you don't, whether or not you're bought into this as a political paradigm or you're not, and to see it as something that could potentially harm you in the wrong person's hands.
Yeah.
And that's, really seeing the ways that all of this interconnects is key to that, because then we can, put stops in place or raise awareness in certain areas so that we know not to interact with these things. Like take solar, for instance, which Tesla bought up SolarCity, and I think SolarCity was founded by Musk's cousins, I believe. SolarCity was acquired by Tesla and is putting in, solar panels in different houses. They had started as a door-to-door solar panel selling company, and they were acquired. But when you put up solar panels on your house and you're feeding the excess back to the grid, you don't necessarily think, well, there might be a possibility that, if the government decides to, they could just reverse the entire thing and pull all of my power out of my house and into the grid, and I won't have any power. So then where do I stand? Because I'm connected to the grid, right? People don't think that way. They're just, oh, I really like the idea of having solar. I like the idea of having a low energy bill. I feel great about myself and responsible that I'm sending power back to the grid. They don't think about how that could be utilized to pull all of their power back to the grid and leave them without power. And what's the stopgap there? How do we engage with this technology in such a way that we know that that's impossible for people to do to us? We have to be vigilant. So there are all of these different scenarios that are wound up in the different companies that he's got, where any two or three of them put together can create either a utopian or dystopian future out of that. But one person's utopia is someone else's dystopia anyway. So no matter how you look at it, it's it's going to be something where we have to pick that apart and hope that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands.
As far as the government connections and DARPA is concerned, is there anything else that comes to mind that you feel you want to mention around that sort of thing?
Absolutely. Well, at the mention of the shots, we know that the shots don't contain any mRNA. We know that the shots contain graphene. We know that the shots are being utilized to put together an infrastructure from person to person of Internet of Bodies. Internet of Bodies was DARPA's baby. It's their big project. They've been building apps that run on top of that infrastructure for the past, if you go back 4 or 5 years and look at all of the symposia archives, you can see, all of the presentations that they were putting forward. The majority of them are about superconductors and Internet of Bodies. Well, where is this Internet of Bodies? How did they propose, setting that up? Well, we know there's DARPA hydrogel in the shots, right? So there's this other aspect to that where we know that people have this Tesla-phoretic equipment within them already. They have nanotech within them. It's coming in through the food, it's coming in through the shots, it's coming in every which way. When it heats, even at room temperature, graphene has Brownian motion. So it's already moving on its own, generating power on its own. But when it's inside the body, it's more likely at that temperature to form connections. And that's how the different circuits align with each other and come online, is by doing that. And I got into that in an article that I wrote about Tesla-phoresis. So I'll give you the link for that as well. But that's just part of it. So like part of it is developing that infrastructure within one person's body, having that person's body communicating with another person's body, having those things interconnect with, perhaps the satellites, the phones, Twitter, social scores. All of this is basically creating a directory of all of the people everywhere. So like when we talk about Zip2, where he came from and the trajectory of his work, he was already trying to create that kind of an infrastructure when he started. So this is just moving it forward, in increments and according to the technologies that are available. And then you've got, OpenAI, and that, that may or may not be, a way to have a seat at the table so that ethics will be on board. But what happens when he's not involved in that anymore? So even if he means well, what happens when he's not involved in that anymore? And is it, and we've got these different competing AI infrastructures that are going on, that are each trying to take over this giant infrastructure of what we already have. And what's been implemented by DARPA. And you can kind of see the trajectory from there. So there's all of these questions that this opens up, and they need to be asked. They need to be brought up in broad daylight among all of humanity, because now we've all been subjected to this in one way or another, whether we said no, whether we said yes, whether it's already internal, whether, we've had people who have died from the experiments. We have so much going on that every person on the planet is involved in this now. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, and it's like you said, once the genie's out of the bottle, it doesn't necessarily matter that much what Elon's personal intentions are, or what his views, worldview, philosophy, ideology, whatever it is. And it's funny because, so many people in the truth movement have such strong opinions about these characters that get thrown up in the media and talked about. And mostly it seems to me people are leaping to conclusions. They're either on the bandwagon or they're in the oppositional camp, and they think he's one of the Illuminati or whatever narrative they've sort of adopted. And it's like, it's actually usually, I think most of the time, it's more complicated and nuanced than that, and which seems to be where you're coming from. And, like case in point, I know a local who is a musician who does like kirtan music, and she's got a pretty decent little following. But one day, Elon's wife stumbled on and shared one of my friend's songs to her network, and gave it quite a significant boost. And it was like, she does it's like spiritual music, kirtan music, that's what my friend plays. And so his wife's sharing this, going, hey, look at this is great. And that's like one of those little data points that doesn't fit the narrative of, oh, these people are working for Satan kind of thing. It's like, there's personal, predilections and tastes, and, we all have opinions on different things. And it's like, whether or not he is intentionally doing X, Y, Z or not, we don't necessarily know, because we're not in his head. We can only make inferences about it and work with the evidence that, you're presenting, for example, and say, okay, well, he's a pragmatist, right? Like, he's one of these people who is thoroughly pragmatic. And you talked about this in your article, where, he's one of these INTJ personalities. Maybe we could dig into that for us and unpack the Elon sort of psychology a bit.
Sure. So if you're an INTJ, you're thinking forward. It's called the mastermind personality. So you see life as pretty much a chess game. You're going to think forward a bunch of moves further than anyone else. And most people are not intuitives. So the N in INTJ stands for intuitive. The majority of people are sensory. They're very concrete thinkers. They're not intuitive. They don't connect dots. That's about 70% of the population. Just right there, it's going to take someone who has like that sort of intuitive ability, someone who has the ability to connect dots to even see the direction that he might be taking something. So if you're going to look at it and really know and be able to size up where the connections are among these things, it would take someone who is an INTJ, an INFJ, or an ENTJ really to see it for what it is. And that's a very small percentage of the population. The majority of the population is just seeing data points as they come through. They're not connecting any dots. They're getting stuck in the news cycle. They're getting memory hold, and that's it. So they're not really seeing it for what it is. So when you look at it that way, and you know that he's the type of person who does this really, really well, and knows what he has to do several steps ahead to gain a monopoly, and knows that people are not going to see the trajectory of the different decisions that he's making and how they fit together. So, on a business side, that's like, that's the nuclear bomb of business acumen, which is what I was talking about in the article. That puts him, on point to gain a monopoly, because who would be able to get that many steps ahead to block him, right? So it depends what he's trying to do in that regard. And even if he does have the best intentions for what he's trying to create, we still have to have checks and balances in place, because it does impact all of humanity. So, when we get to that point where something does, have that great of an impact, and it's left up to, 1, 2, or 10 people to decide the fate of everyone, we have to decide whether we're going to engage with that or opt out of it, and take appropriate steps in that direction.
Yeah, and it's, the picture that you're painting with all these different pieces of infrastructure that he's accumulating, pulling together, and the connections he's got with government agencies. DARPA is a particularly dubious one. If we look at the last, say, 5-6 years, there's been an exponential, or at least what appears to be on the surface, an exponential attack on, just as an example, right, to kind of flesh out these scenarios that you're talking about. The potential for the dystopian scenario would seem to be huge, because last few years we've seen dozens and dozens of alternative health practitioners actually being assassinated. There's no real other way to put it. I mean, they've been intentionally culled, taken out. These people who are doing great work, saying things that the mainstream system doesn't want them to say, and really, more importantly, I guess, at the same time, doing things in terms of healing people, reversing certain types of damage, dealing with certain types of damage that is taboo, like vaccine-related damage, and then understanding this stuff and fleshing it out and explaining it to people. The system doesn't want them to do that, and we've seen these people assassinated by the dozen. So that's pre all of this infrastructure becoming operationalized, controlled by AI, and really, really taken to the full sinister extent that it could go to. And that's just what they've already managed to do with dissenters. So the potential for something incredibly horrendously dystopian is really, I mean, it seems to be emerging. I'm not saying that I think it's going to get there necessarily, but what they have done already without it is quite astonishing. And what this technology and the connectedness of everything will do once everyone's got the, the hydrogel in them, the nanotech in them, once they're all living in their smart homes, where everything is remotely controlled, the car's remotely controlled. I mean, oh, look, the brakes have failed. Oh, they hit a tree on the bend. What a shame. What a shame. Another doctor, bites the dust. So, yes.
Right. Yeah. So we do have to look at all of these like interconnective nodes among the different projects, so that we can flesh this out. And it's not just him, right? This is across the board, all of these different projects. It's all of DARPA's projects. It's all of the other projects that are hooked into government, that are, across the United States, across the world. voting even being one of them, creating that sort of infrastructure around the vote where it's all being used to send certain people in. It's all being used for regime change. It's not being used, as an actual agent of democracy in the way that we would think of democracy. We're propagandized with democracy constantly, but it's not in the way that we would think about it. Those systems were developed as an agent of regime change. And the reason that no one will touch looking at those systems is because it would expose regime change across the world. It would cause massive civil unrest. No one can go there because they don't want to expose it. They don't want that to happen. They don't want the apocalypse, basically. They, and they want it to be controlled. You lose control when you get to that point. It's too much chaos. They want a controlled amount of chaos where they can slip certain things in and move things around. They don't want mass chaos.
Yeah.
So they really
they don't want the complete infrastructural meltdown where they can no longer continue to manipulate.
Right. Because it takes away everything that they've already built, and they have to start from scratch on a lot of that. So
it's interesting, you look at the last election in the States, and the incredible amount of just unbelievable fuckery that was coming out of that. People, and not that it matters, but someone goes to vote for Trump and then Biden comes up on the screen and they're like, no, I'm trying to vote for Trump, but it's going, you have voted for Joe Biden, thanks. And they're like, no.
Yeah. And even people showing up that supposedly had voted already. Yeah. And they weren't able to vote because their identities were taken over. There were so many different ways that this was happening, or stuffing the ballot boxes, with all the write-ins. There were so many different ways that this was done, but it's not just this election. It's been happening election after election. There was a great documentary that was put out around the time of the 2016 election about what was it called? Black box voting. If you look into that, it was about fractional voting, where the votes go into a system and they're broken into fractions, and then certain people are made to win. Well, where are these fractional votes? Where are these half a person and a quarter of a person? That doesn't make any sense, but that's exactly what's there.
Yeah, crazy. But they've been getting away with it for years.
And not just here, but everywhere they wanted to install a different leader who would play ball. And that's really what's going on here. So where you were saying, certain people are, in the Illuminati and certain people aren't, and this and that, I don't think it's as cut and dry as that. What I think happens is similar to, and I'm not saying, anyone is doing this or isn't doing this, but the way that I'm gathering this goes down is it's similar to how dirty cops keep each other in check. They always have some sort of blackmail material on each other to know that the other one is willing to play ball. It's the same as when you're initiated into a gang or something like that. The gang will have dirt on you to keep you in control. And this, shows up all over different facets of society. It's nothing new, but that's one of the ways that they keep people in check, so that they know that they own them, is to have blackmail material on them, so that if at any point something should happen, they could come forward with that and say, oh, we have XYZ and you will do exactly what we say. So it may not even be that, that the person even did something wrong if they have that big of a conscience and they don't want it out there. It depends. So, we can see this on all different levels, but that's generally how that kind of thing happens, whether or not they're fully embedded in something like that. And maybe they had a bad night, they were really drunk, and they were positioned in a certain way where somebody took pictures or whatever. We don't know. And with deep fakes, how could you know? And I think that's why deep fakes were ushered in, so that you can't possibly know.
Yeah.
If you see a picture of somebody doing X, Y, and Z, they could just say, "Oh, that's a deep fake."
Yeah. It cuts both ways. They seem to the introduction of that pathological confusion and uncertainty seems to be something that they think they can capitalize on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, it's a matter of being vigilant and knowing, what all of this technology is and what it stands for and what it can be used for in concert, and to know that this is what we're up against. This is what we need to see, and this is what we need to protect ourselves against, just so that, just like what I was saying about, we prep to be able to know that we will have what we need to survive, but we don't want to beg that on by hyper focusing on it and bringing that reality to us. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to co-create a reality that's in our best interests.
Yeah.
And that's what understanding this would bring about, knowing that we need to say no.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had many opportunities over the last few decades to say no, and some cracking good opportunities in the last 3 years to say no. And
Yeah,
honestly, I think that the time has it's really past time. I can't believe I was having this conversation with Amy, yesterday or the day before, about we cannot believe the number of people who. You'll find the full video and any bonus materials in my exclusive members-only portal, the Truthiversity. This unique creation is the official home for all my multimedia research and entertainment content. Updated regularly, my members get access to absolutely everything I create, including full podcasts, courses, articles, videos, audio files, the whole enchilada. Book your spot at truthiversity.com.